Okay, I'm Cheryl Kwoka, and I'm a state certified residential real estate appraiser. And I am going to talk today about the appraisal. And I was just going to go through kind of step by step on the form so that you guys could see what goes into the report. And I've taken an actual house that I appraised in the Waterset community down in Apollo Beach. Um, and I just, I took out all of the personal information of the borrower. It was for refinance, and I did this for a lender. And so I just got rid of all that information and left a lot of the shell of this report. And I wanted to just show you where things go, how appraisers get to what they get to, and what they have to show in their work so that the lender's satisfied and Fannie Mae is satisfied. And so I have my multiple listing up, and I have the Hillsborough County tax card up if you guys want to do the same in case we end up looking at something in that way. So that might be good. Just get your MLS opened up and maybe even type in Waterset if you have the ability to get that community pulled up. Okay, so this is a pretty detailed form that Fannie Mae has us use for these reporting our findings. On any appraisal, if I was to do an appraisal just for an individual, somebody that just wants to maybe list their home, or an attorney, or maybe a estate planner, that kind of thing, we don't have to use these forms. You could write it on a piece of paper. You could do an oral report. But Fannie Mae does have these pretty lengthy, detailed reports. And so that's kind of what I wanted to go through today to show you. So basically, you're just going to start at the top of the form. And so we got the property address, street. This Paradiso was the name of the street in Apollo Beach. I just knocked everything else out, though, the borrower's name and the owner of record. And then, this is where you put your legal description and your assessor's parcel number. And all of this information is basically coming from the Hillsborough County tax card. So it will just come through the assessor's parcel number, and then you're going to pick the tax year, and you're going to note what the taxes were for the year of 2023 for this particular property. And the neighborhood is called the Covington area, even though it's a Waterset community. The actual neighborhood boundaries are Covington. This is the section, township, and range. Those are ways to find a property on the map. The census tract is this number here. And then you want to let the lender know that the property is owner occupied. It may be a rental as a tenant, or it may be vacant. But in this case, the owners were living there, and they pay about $89 a year for their HOA. You're appraising the fee simple rights. It's not a leasehold, but it is fee simple. This is where you let them know whether it's a purchase or a refi, or maybe it's an equity line. Click that one if it's equity. This is where you put the lender, Van Dyke, and their address. And then you're going to talk about here, is the subject property offered for sale, or has it been offered for sale in the last 12 months? And if you click these boxes, you can talk about some history on the property. And so they want to know, has it been on and off the market 3 times in the last 2 years, but never sold? This is where you can talk about these kinds of things. So you would just click yes, and then you can put days on the market. Maybe you can talk about the fact that it's a FSBO, it's just for sale by owner. You want to put the MLS number. And then these boxes here are for you to list as many times. Sometimes you might see a house come down in price over a year's time, and it's been lowered 6 times, 7 times before it ever gets moved. And the lender wants to know that, they want to see the history on it. So those are where you report those changes. And then, so then you're coming down, and you're going to fill out this whole section is all about the subject. And then this whole section, as you see on the left, is all about the contract. So now if it's a purchase, you're going to analyze that contract, and we're required to do that now, to really look in and see what are the details of surrounding that contract. What, the meeting of the minds, the date things were signed, what is the scheduled closing date, how much was put down, are there any special considerations for us to think about, appraisal contingencies, any gap, things like that. So we have to analyze all that, and that's where we're going to report it here. And so we're looking at those details and reporting what we find. Obviously, the lender has the same contract, but sometimes Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we got some different information. So all that needs to be reported. So you have to realize or have to note whether I did analyze or I didn't analyze the contract. And then you're going to put some details about it. Is it an REO sale? Is it is it a short sale? Is it a court ordered sale? Estate relo? Is it non-arm's length? Is it a transaction among two brothers, two family members? Something like that. Or is, traditionally though, you're going to put it's an arm's length transaction. And then you're going to analyze, or you're going to put your findings of the contract. So, you might say, the contract was analyzed by the appraiser, and then you go into all the details about what you did, what you found. Make sure everybody's on the same page. You're going to put the contract price, the date of the contract. Is the property the seller, the owner of record? Yes, sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's something going on there. And you want to report your data source and how you came to that. Then you're going to talk about any financial assistance. And that's, been a big one recently. So sometimes you'll put, yes, there's some financial assistance, or, somebody's paying $5,000 in closing cost assistance. And so that's going to be where you analyze the entire contract section is right here. Okay, and then you're going to move down to your neighborhood section. And, you can fill all these things out at different points. Maybe, some appraisers go and do this whole first page first. Some of them go and do the market data first from MLS. Some of them put the comps in first. But this, basically I have a template, and I have done so much work in Waterset through the years that I just keep cloning the same one. And so a lot of this stuff is canned information, but you just update it every time you go back in and apply it to that particular property. And then you analyze the market again at that time. And if any of these things need to be updated or changed, then you make those changes.
Question for you. You had brought up seller concessions. I just have a question regarding that. So sometimes I see appraisers make adjustments if the comps had seller concessions, and sometimes I don't. How do you make that judgment call?
Well, yeah, and it'll be over here on this next page, but there is, if you find out that, a home sold, with some seller credits and it made an impact, and you see it a lot on VA financing. And so if you do a lot of VA work, you'll see that, you typically take off that $5,000 off the top of that comp. If it's sold for $700 with a $5,000 seller concession and it was listed for $695 in MLS, that can tell you that 5,000 was inflated that up to $7,000. So you take that off, you knock that $5,000 off. But it's not always, you don't always. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's super common in that community. A builder's throwing $5,000 or $10,000, and everybody knows that coming in. It's not something that's making such a big dramatic difference in those prices. It's not maybe drawing the buyer in specifically just because of that. And so you may not make an adjustment. It just depends. You got to analyze all those sales and see how they went. And sometimes you have to talk to the agent and find out. And if they say, yeah, the only way we could get rid of it was to throw in $10,000, then okay, maybe you need to make that adjustment. But it's not a mechanical adjustment. It just depends on, it's a market driven analysis. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I've personally never had a appraiser call me to ask why the concession was given. You're saying some appraisers will do that?
Yeah, sometimes they do, sometimes they should be if it's substantial. I mean, I just appraised a house in a place called gosh, I can't think, Terramore in Odessa recently, and it had one house sold for 1.5 and it had a $93,000 seller credit. So it's you have to check into that. You have to find out what happened there, because that's a big deal. And it turned out that the builder was just offering, some serious assistance, so you'll have them call you from time to time. I think moving forward with everything changing with NAR, and seller credits are going to have to be super transparent, and appraisers are going to have to really analyze how they affected things and get some details on them. So I think you might see it moving forward a little bit further after the summer.
This is Ted Weeder. Just a question for you. Are you going to take that into your evaluation of the property and lower your evaluation number?
You mean if you
Right.
make if you take a price off?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean if it has to be a negative adjustment, then it does affect that number. Yes, it may not affect your final sale price, but it's going to affect it in the grid how it's reported.
So let me just, I'm sorry. Um, so I'll just use something real simple. We have $100,000 property and the property is worth $100,000. We know that. The seller decide to sell it for $70,000. So is your report going to reflect that the property is only worth $70,000?
Oh, so they've what does it show? It'll show $70,000 in the MLS
Could be, yes.
final sale price.
Yes, ma'am.
But whatever the final sale price is what we have to go by. The intention that they wanted to sell it for 100 doesn't really come into play anywhere. I'm not, is that,
Okay.
does that make, I mean, you're going through all that negotiation with this person, but then the final thing happens and it was 70,000. Now the appraiser can look at that and say, boy, that seems to be really underpriced. What happened here? And call the agent and you go, yeah, well, at the end of it, we couldn't move it, so we had to sell it for 70, or they just decided to give it a big discount for no reason. And all the comps though support 100, 110, 90, something like that. And you're the one low oddball. As an appraiser, I'm probably not going to use that one for comparison because it's not it doesn't represent market value.
Okay.
Right, because but as far as the history on it, that doesn't necessarily come into play. We might see that it was listed for 100 and then we can dig into it further. But if it ends up going that low just because no real reason, if it's not condition related or something else, then it's just a strange sale. And we do kick out those outliers. Sometimes you've just got some oddballs that are super low or super high. And it's a best practices to kind of kick them out and use what the majority shows. All right, so anyway, we're going to go back into the neighborhood, and this is going to show the lender, some of the characteristics and the one-unit housing trend. And this is very significant section because you have to talk about whether the trend is increasing or it's stable or it's declining. And we've just been up and down all over the place recently, but I did establish that it was stable in that market, in that neighborhood for properties that were comparable to the property that I appraised. And so we'll go into that further too on another page, but this is just kind of letting them know, if you're in a really urban area, you're, Channel Side or something, or maybe you're very rural and you're down in Lithia, or you're suburban somewhere in the middle, then you're going to talk about your neighborhood boundaries. And again, your neighborhood is back up here. It's Covington. And if you look on the map in MLS, you'll see the neighborhood boundaries, Big Bend, Highway 41, so that's pretty important too, because some lenders are really picky about you going out of the neighborhood. So if they see that your neighborhood boundaries are here, and then you used a comp though that's north of Big Bend, or you used a comp that was further east of 75 than you are, they're going to want to know why you went out of the neighborhood. Why did you go out of that boundary? And you have to have some good valid reason of why you extended that. This is the one-unit housing trend. So you're going to show properties that are comparable to you, the age, the present land use, how it's broken down to get to 100%. The neighborhood description, that changes a lot right now too. You're going to talk about Waterset. It's a large plan development. You're going to go into some details about the neighborhood, what's surrounding there, what's happening there, what are some trends going on there. This is a pretty generic statement, but sometimes you have to get pretty extensive if you're in an odd area that has a lot happening. So that's where you put that. The market conditions says to see the attached form. So that's a pretty big form that we do. So that's, instead of going into much detail there, I'd had it on the following page. So now you've done your neighborhood. Now you're moving into your site section. So you're going to talk specifically about this lot. It's 60 by 121 feet. So the total is about 7,200. It's a rectangular shape. It might be pie shape. It might be irregular. You're going to talk about your view. It's a pretty big deal whether you might look out over power lines, or maybe you look out over a golf course, or, this is your adjustment can be triggered from this view. So it's important that you get this one accurate, you know, residential and water, let's just say, or maybe you've got an adverse view that's affecting the value. Maybe it's power lines they look out over. Maybe it's just neutral. You know, maybe it's beneficial. If it's beneficial, you might put the beneficial, you're going to make adjustments on both sides for some of the comps and the differences. We're going to talk about the zoning here. So this is pretty traditional, just a PD, a plan development, but there's all kinds of different zonings. I mean, there's, you know, agricultural, single family, you know, low to medium density. And again, I just have these saved in here because I see them over and over again. But and then you're going to talk about the highest and best use, and this is really where an appraiser starts. This is an important thing to analyze the best use of that property. You know, let's just say you're in South Tampa and you've got what they might call a tear down, you know, and the house that's sitting on it built in 30s or 40s or something, and it's really has no contributory value anymore. The land is worth more than what they've got there. So you're going to analyze that property. You're going to analyze the site and find out how it fits in the market. And sometimes you don't continue with the residential form. Sometimes if it's worth more vacant, you've got to go in that direction. So that's the beginning process for an appraiser. And then you talk about your site here. You got your electricity and gas, water and sewer. This is where you'd put, they had well and septic. Analyze that for the lender. If it's well and septic and you're out in, you know, East Hillsborough County somewhere, you have to talk about whether or not that's common for this neighborhood that you're in. You want to, you know, there's a lot of that goes into the site section. Is the street private or public? If it's private, who maintains it? You know, this is why the appraisers ask a lot of questions a lot of times when you see them at a site. They're wanting to get, you know, a lot of the MLS is not accurate on these things. They've got well and septic when it's city public utilities, or they've got it public utilities, you know, they got it backwards maybe, or they didn't know, and so they don't report it accurately. Sometimes you got to make a call to the county and find out what they had there.
For the agents on the call, so like when the lender calls you at the, you know, towards the end of the transaction and they say, hey, we need a well water test, like, you know, you got an FHA loan or a VA loan, and the lender calls and says you need a well water test. Well, if we don't know that it has a well, you know, if it's on well and septic, then, you know, we don't know to tell you about the well water test. So when the underwriter reviews the appraisal, which generally you're getting an underwriting approval on the buyer's part of the loan before the appraisal comes in a lot of the time. So then when the appraisal comes in, when we resubmit, you know, the final conditions along with the appraisal, and then the underwriter sees that it's on well and septic, and then they say, oh, we need a well water test. Well, this is why it comes up towards, you know, kind of towards the end of the transaction versus in the beginning. So make sure to let your lender know if it is on well and septic for that specific loan program, because you want to get that well water test knocked out in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And the appraiser has to do some analysis. You know, I had one that I did for an FHA long time ago, and the lady had a well and a septic tank, and she was going to FHA, and she had sewer lines that had come through her neighborhood, you know, water and sewer, that since she'd been there. And so I let the lender know that you have to let the lender know, is public water and sewer available? And it happened to be available for her. She just had never connected, but they do a feasibility study and found out that she was more beneficial for her to connect. So she had to spend about 10 grand to get connected before she could do anything. And so I had to go back out and confirm that it had been connected for her. So there's a lot that goes behind it. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up. Yeah, there's a certain percentage that like the certain percentage of the cost of it that the lender I think it's dependent maybe on the loan program. I think it's for FHA and government loans. I'm not sure for conventional, not 100% sure, but yeah, I mean, those are you definitely want to bring that up with the lender, like in the beginning.
Absolutely.
I remember one time, this is like 15 years ago, I told the buyer that they had to get a well and a septic inspection done. They didn't truly have to get the well and septic inspection done. They only had to get the water test done. But I told them they had to do well and septic incorrectly. However, they ended up getting the septic inspection done, and the septic tank was spewing raw sewage underneath the ground. And it ended up being like a $15,000 repair it was a bank-owned property that the bank ended up having to repair. And the buyer found out that the septic inspection wasn't required after I told him it was. I said, I bet you're glad you got your septic inspection done now. So,
Yes.
but yeah, let the lender
Yeah,
know.
And it's tricky too. There's some neighborhoods in central Tampa that have a septic tank, and I've had that come up before. And you're just at the site, and I always try to ask if I'm just not sure. Hey, do you have a septic here? Do you have a well here? Let's talk about it. And I've been tripped up like, oh my gosh, how do you have a septic tank here? It's so random, but it is a tricky one. Good point. And then you're talking about, are there any adverse site conditions? And so if you do have something funky with the land, you got to talk about it there. And maybe you're going to say there are some problems with some encroachments, some easements, that kind of thing that somebody needs to know about. And you call for some testing or call for something to happen. You're going to report that right there. So anyway, you're going to talk about the description of the house. These are the improvements. It's a one-story. It's a ranch built in 2019. And then you're going to move over to like the foundation. They want to know if it's on piers, is it on slab, the shingle, that you're reporting the condition of the product behind the actual product. So you have concrete block and stucco. A lot of these are just codes, the kind of flooring, the kind of trim and floor tile, wainscoting, you're reporting all these things that you're finding at the house. You take your clipboard with you and you've got all these things in your iPad, and then you put them in here and tell the lender what you found. So you got a fence, you got a pool and spa and pavers, talk about your attic here, your improvements and your appliances. It's a 743. So it had a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, and 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. And there's your square footage. These are the additional features that you want to talk about. You want to tell the lender if they've got some super green energy type features going on, maybe a little bit about the house. You're going to report any condition things that you found out here, whether if it's 1978 house, it's got peeling paint everywhere, you're going to call for some inspections and some cleanup on things like that. And so you're just reporting all about the details of that house. And then you move over to the grid and you've got your comps. These are your sales. And these were actual closed sales that took place in Waterset that I use for comparison to my house. And so this is how this grid lays out. This is how the appraisers come up with their adjustments. And it's very clear. It's all, laid out here for us to kind of analyze across the board. But this is comp 1, 2, and 3. And it's got the address. It's got their sale price. And you can see how we can quickly just reference all this information. You're looking at the sale date. That's what's here in the contract date. The lot size. Here's that stuff about the site that comes, from the first page that we showed you. Then you've got the style being ranch, traditional 2-story maybe. And these are all the adjustments that the appraisers make across the board for different differences compared to the subject. My house is 2,557 square feet. The only one that was really so big was this one, and actually this one. So you can see these numbers, how the adjustment factors come in. And all this is another call here, basically, but there's ways that the appraisers can make adjustments, and you can call it, that was at $85 a square foot, that the market's showing a difference of about $85 a foot, but if you change it to 75, it moves these numbers differently. The cost per square foot, this one sold at $710, and it has 2,700 square feet, which means it sold for $262 a foot. Now, if that house had sold at $800,000, let's just say, it changes that cost per square foot. These are all calculated automatically for you, so it comes up to $296 a foot. So if my house at the end, let's say it was worth $750, it tells me that house is worth $750, which equates to $293 a foot. So anyway, this is where the appraisers report all this stuff for each of these comps, and they make these adjustments. They come out with all these features at the bottom: pool, garage, energy efficient things. And this is where you report the history. It's real important to report the history of a comp. Let's say this had been flipped 3 times in the last 2 years. You got to talk about it. You got to explain why, what happened, what was the surroundings of that history. Fannie Mae has to know that. That's a big important thing for Fannie Mae, for us to report those findings. Then you're going to talk about which comp you looked at the most, which one did you end up liking the most? After all the adjustments are said and done, I've got 3 comps here, and then I had 3 more over here. So which one ended up being some of the best ones that I liked the most? And that's how you come up with your number from there. You have a comment addendum that goes into every single comp that you used. Sale 1, talk about that one. Why was it good? Sale 2, blah, 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 built by a competing builder. Sale 3 had this going on. Comp 4 had this going on. And you're kind of telling the lender that, you know, this is what I found on each of my comps. And that gives your support for how you relied on a few of those comps for your actual number. You know, then you've got a market condition form that you fill out that's based on how many sales took place in there that were comparable to you, so that you can show the lender your trend. Is it really stable? You know, and in this case, in the last 365 days, we had some fluctuations in the median price, but at the end of the day, it really ended up being pretty stable. You might say if it all was going up on a trend, it would be increasing. Maybe you say it's declining. Might be starting to see that soon. In some neighborhoods, I'm already seeing that. So if it is declining, then you have support for making time adjustments. If it is increasing, you also have support for making time adjustments. But you got to go and get all that ironed out by doing some analysis through MLS. So anyway, that's the MC form. More comments about that. I want to give the lender some ideas about what's going on in Waterset right now. I talked to them about the fact that there's a lot of cash purchases. I explained to them that there's some serious closing cost assistance going on right now. That's a new thing I'm seeing in there. A lot of VA financing, a lot of cash. I tell them how many community sales that they had, you know, talked about MLS, talked about the builder arrangements. So you're just explaining what you're finding, you know. Then you've got a couple pages of certification. These are all the things that tell you what the appraisal shows you and what the appraiser did, how they came up with things. There's a lot of details in here. This is my signature at the bottom. I'm signing that I, you know, was out there on the 24th, or excuse me, I was out there on the 19th. And by the 24th, I submitted my report, and these certifying that I have a value of 778. Down here is you got stuff like site maps, flood maps. There's the floor plan. We measured the house to ANSI standards. That shows the floor plan, so the reader can see the flow of the house, the design. And then you have probably about 10 pages of pictures, but I took those all out. And then all the comp photos are in here. These are all the pictures of the sales. That shows the reader again, like how you came up with some design adjustments. You know, you can see that this house was the highest sale I had. I think it sold for 900. And it was because it had some really interesting detail that was not standard, not builder standard stuff. So it gives you some room to say, that's why I made some adjustments there. So then anyway, the last couple pages are just the definitions. Some of these, it shows you how we're coming up with the codes that we put in. There's a lot of codes now for Fannie Mae on conditions, C1, C2, C3, 4, 5, and 6. They show you exactly what each one means. And then you've got some appraiser independence forms. These are some things that you would just need to sign to show that you followed the home valuation code of conduct. You're certifying things like that right there. And this tells the lender whether you've done a full inspection, whether you have done services on this house before. That happens a lot. I'll do a house 1 year and then 2 years later, you may go back for another refi. And it's very important that you report that you were there before, that you were in that house within a 3-year period for anything. You know, maybe I'm a handyman, I don't know, and I went in and did some work on the house before. Anything, you need to talk about it. So anyway, there's that. And then you might want to put the tax card in for the lender. There's a page for that. So you would take the Hillsborough County tax card and just populate it into your report to show them what's on the county tax card as opposed to what you came up with. Maybe they'll see some differences in square footage, and you can say, well, I measured the house. I know it's not 2,500 square feet. It's actually 2,800. And here's how I know. And you show them your sketch. So all of these pieces are just to end up showing them at the end of it all, they want to see you know, that number right there and how you got to that number and what date you were there. And that's only good that day. It's not good the next day, a week later. You know, you mean it on the 19th of April. That's what the value was. And so that's a pretty important number because, you know, something could happen the next day that changes everything. So, and then this little last section on the reconciliation, it just is telling them, you know, how you came up with what you really looked at. And in this situation, I kind of did a weighted average where I was looking at each comp that I used. I had 6 in there, and I kind of explained why each one was so strong. And so that's pretty much that. Anybody have any questions?
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
My first question is, it says the appraisal is good for that day. The appraisal gets done, but you know, it's for I just don't understand how it's only for that day. Is there a time frame when it comes to a contract? Because
Well,
I know
no, it
people.
just means that as of that date, you know, on the 19th, that value was 778. You know,
Correct.
I mean, there's, you know, Sean can probably answer this one a little bit further, but you're gonna, you know, the lender's gonna use that until the loan gets closed, you know, and so
Correct.
that tool, the appraisal is a tool for them to put lots of pieces of the loan together.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to pick, you have to pick a day and a time to have been establishing that number. It just means that, I mean, let's say the next day I put in a pending sale in here. This
Right.
property on Hourglass was going to close. Well, you know, the value, if I go back out there on a month later, maybe that one's sold and you have a new number instead of 778, you're 8.25 now. So
Right.
you know, you got to find a day though to establish the date of value. And they
Okay.
fluctuate around that. Now, I don't know, maybe Sean can tell you, but if enough time passes and the loan doesn't close, maybe down the road they go back and they say, well, there's been some changes, probably let's get an update on that report. And at which time the appraiser can go and say, okay, I'll do an update for you and let you know if it's gone up or down and if you need to proceed
Gotcha.
further with another appraisal. But
Okay. Okay.
it has, yeah, you definitely have to establish a date of inspection and a date of the value.
Okay. Because I know some listings you'll have see it on the market and they'll have the appraisal was done. But let's say the home has been on the market for 3 or 4 months. Now that's
Yeah.
nice that appraisal was done, but you may need a new one, like you said, to update.
Oh, no, absolutely. And it, you know, it's hard to, you know, sometimes a realtor will order an appraisal and you know, I'll just tell them, hey, it's good today. But I mean, you don't know what might happen tomorrow. And so if you find yourself with this house sitting, call me. We can do an update on it and I'll
Perfect.
give you some current data, right? And see what's happening
Okay.
as time goes on.
Okay, one more question. I just wanted to know, why do they need to know whether or not if there was financial assistance? What does that have to do with the value? Why would they even ask that question on the contract? I know you said they were looking thoroughly at the contract and also checking to see if there was financial assistance from the buyer.
Well, like let's just say that the seller's paying 5,000 in closing costs. Is that what you mean?
Well, I understand. So that's the only one when you're saying financial assistance. You're not saying they're like getting down payment assistance programs or anything like that.
Yeah, then you would report that if they're getting down payment assistance. You know, they just want to see how if there's anything that's inflating the number, right? Or if there's anything that is surrounding that contract, whether, yeah, if you're in a neighborhood that's offering them $65,000 worth of assistance, then you have to talk about that. And maybe you
Yeah.
found some comps that sold with that same arrangement, you know, and you can tell them, yes, it's common for the neighborhood. It does appear to be happening. Here's 3 comps that did the same way. Here's what they closed for. Here's their
Right.
adjustment amount. Yeah, you definitely have to report any of that. If that's in the contract, we have to talk about it.
And I get that for a community for new construction. I'm more so saying
Yeah.
like if someone's trying to get down payment assistance through the state of Florida or something like, or through Tampa, why would that need to be included? It seems like it would start to exclude those. Is that something, I just was wondering why they even need that information.
I don't know. Sean, can you answer that further? Is he still there?
I think Sean had to jump off. He had another event to attend.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I'll ask him.
I know. I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that one.
Okay, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right. Well, Cheryl, thank you very much for your invaluable information again. We really appreciate it. And well, hands down that, you know, the other agents on this call appreciate it as well.
Thank you.